In the heart of the eternal city, Rome once again stirred with a spiritual tremor, not from the bells of St. Peter's Basilica echoing through the cobbled streets, but from the voice of a man newly seated upon the chair of Peter, Pope Leo XIV. He did not arrive like a politician, seeking consensus. He arrived like a shepherd, weathered yet unwavering, carrying not a new ideology but an old fire, the fire of clarity, of conviction, of truth. Just 2 days after receiving the apostolic blessing, Pope Leo XIV stood before a full assembly in the Clementine Hall. His presence was both serene and thunderous. The eyes of ambassadors from every corner of the globe fixed on him, unsure whether to expect the smooth continuity of diplomacy or the unsettling echo of something greater. When he opened his mouth and spoke 3 words, peace, justice, truth, the room tightened like a drum. They were words heard many times, yes, but rarely carried with such authority. Unknown to most, earlier that morning, Cardinal Robert Sarah, in the seclusion of a monastery cloaked by olive trees and prayer, had whispered a meditation into the silence of his brethren. When the voices of eco-feminist liberation theology grow loud against the Pope, he said, it is a sign that he walks in the truth. The words were not broadcast, not published, but truth, like water, finds its way. They reached the Vatican, they reached the faithful, and they reached the walls of that very hall where Pope Leo would speak without hesitation. If you love God and want to grow in faith, grab my book Bible Decoded on Amazon. Link below. Let it change your life. His voice did not tremble. Peace, he said, is born not in treaties or in policy papers, but in the conversion of hearts. And then came the thunder. It is built in the heart and from the heart, eradicating pride and measuring our language. For even with words we can kill. These were not metaphors. These were wounds wrapped in speech. They struck the diplomats of the West like a northern wind, chilling in its purity. He did not pause to wait for applause. This was no performance. It was a pastoral act, a spiritual surgery. The truth, he continued, must be spoken with charity, but never hidden out of cowardice, and as though summoned by divine timing. He turned to the subject many assumed he would avoid, the family, not through veiled allusions or theoretical musings, but with blunt and blessed clarity. It is essential to invest in the family founded on the stable union between man and woman, he said. A statement so theologically grounded and culturally contested that a Scandinavian diplomat let out an audible sigh. A Latin American delegate shifted in his seat, but Pope Leo XIV pressed on. The unborn, the elderly, the sick, the immigrant, the unemployed. Every life mattered. Every face bore the image of God. And behind the curtain of media narratives and political agendas, Cardinal Robert Sarah smiled in silence. He knew what had just occurred. The truth had been proclaimed, not in debate, not in contradiction, but in pure ecclesial certainty. After the speech, the Vatican's communications office tried, gently, to soften the impact. They spoke of tone, of continuity, of interpretive balance. But no theological jargon could mute the clarity of the moment. For when the Pope says, the Church cannot shy away from proclaiming the truth, he does not speak as an influencer. He speaks as the successor of Peter, heir to the rock that does not shift. 2 days after his words reverberated through the marble halls of the Apostolic Palace, Pope Leo XIV rose early. The air in Rome felt weightier, charged with the quiet expectation that history was once again unfolding not through chaos or spectacle, but through conviction. And in a chapel not far from the basilica, Cardinal Sarah knelt in stillness, whispering the psalms in the darkness of dawn. He knew that the tremor was only beginning, for truth, once spoken aloud, has its own momentum. By the time the sun bathed the city in gold, thousands had begun discussing the implications of the Pope's inaugural diplomatic address. Pundits spun commentary on television. Politicians drafted reactions. Progressive theologians met in academic forums, already drafting critiques. In Paris, a well-known eco-feminist collective issued a statement calling the Pope's words a return to patriarchal dogma dressed in pastoral garb. Yet it was Cardinal Sarah's earlier reflection that quietly traveled further and deeper than any headline. In private conversations within seminaries and abbeys, young priests whispered his meditation like scripture. When confusion attacks the truth, it only proves its necessity. And in the papal apartments, Pope Leo XIV sat at a simple desk, refusing to change a single word of the text he had delivered. If it is the truth, he told a confidant, let it be spoken. The next day, during a routine audience with the Curia, the Pope offered no apologies, no backtracking. Instead, he spoke of sacred duty, the duty to remind the Church of her identity not as a political organism or humanitarian agency, but as the bride of Christ, consecrated in blood and built upon rock. We must not be afraid to speak clearly, he said. When the gospel is reduced to slogans, we are no longer evangelizing. We are campaigning. Those words, captured on a staffer's phone and later shared in whispers and reposts, ignited something. In the Philippines, seminarians stood and clapped after reading the transcript aloud. In South Korea, an underground community of Catholics held a candlelit vigil to pray for the Pope's safety and perseverance. And in France, protests outside Notre Dame mirrored the spiritual fault line that now divided the Church, not between liberals and conservatives, but between those who believed truth was negotiable and those who knew it never was. As the days unfolded, so too did the papacy of Leo XIV, not as a honeymoon of applause, but as a pilgrimage through sacred fire. On the third day, he visited a pediatric hospital unannounced. No cameras, no entourage, just the quiet dignity of a man holding the trembling hand of a terminal child. In that moment, the critics of rigid dogma forgot their talking points, because here was a man who not only proclaimed truth in doctrine, but lived it in charity. Later that night, in a small chapel illuminated only by candlelight, the Pope knelt before the Eucharist. He did not seek power, prestige, or popularity. He sought only one thing, to serve the will of Christ. And as he prayed, the red pallium upon his shoulders seemed to shimmer, not as decoration, but as the weight of centuries resting on the shoulders of one who would not bend. And far away, in the dusty quiet of a seminary in Nigeria, a young man who once doubted his vocation read the speech of Pope Leo XIV. He closed the book slowly, looked up at the crucifix on the wall, and whispered, "Now I understand." If you love God and want to grow in faith, grab my book Bible Decoded on Amazon. Link below. Let it change your life. If this content blesses you and you'd like to support our mission, you can buy me a coffee or give a super thanks. Every contribution helps us create more content to inspire and uplift others. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on my future videos.